box. You opened it. We can...
Hey gang, welcome back to yet another video by the one and only Lore Lockdown. Somewhere deep inside a locked drawer, a museum case, or at the bottom of an antique dealer's crate, there's a small black box waiting to be picked up. For a normal person who's never seen it before, it doesn't look particularly dangerous. Some people might mistake it for a puzzle or an unusual curiosity. Trust me when I say this. If you handed it to someone, there's a good chance they would become intrigued by how it worked and start fidgeting with it, trying to solve it. Scarily, that's the entire point. Over the last 4 decades, the Lament Configuration has become one of the most iconic and memorable objects in horror cinema. Because it's not merely a puzzle box that people play with, it's the key to a doorway. If you manage to solve it, something will notice you. And that something is not simply a ghost or a poltergeist, it's something ancient and inhuman. Even people familiar with the Lament Configuration may not understand all its rules because those rules have changed across Clive Barker's novella and the original film series, the Epic Comics continuity, and the 2022 reboot. Questions arise, such as, can someone be forced to open it? Who actually created the first box? And who's in charge once it is opened? In the original film, the Cenobites appear to act as independent explorers of extreme sensation. Hellbound, Hellraiser 2 introduces Leviathan as the ruler of the labyrinth, and the entity served by Julia and the transformed Dr. Channard. Later stories connect Leviathan more directly to the Cenobites and their hierarchy, although the mythology is not entirely consistent across every continuity. In today's video, we'll be going through the complete anatomy of this mythology, including the box and the Order of the Gash. But before we get into it, make sure you grab a bucket of popcorn, because this is going to be a long and scary ride.
It's just a puzzle box!
Oh no. It is a means to summon us.
What is the Lament Configuration? If we strip away the mythology related to the Lament Configuration and the decades of lore that have been built around it, the basic concept's actually pretty simple. It's a small ornate puzzle box that acts as a key, but instead of opening a drawer or a safe filled with valuables, it opens a passage between dimensions. At first glance, the Lament Configuration does not look dangerous. It's decorated with gold-colored patterns and hidden seams and is small enough to fit in one hand. The design invites curiosity. It's something a person might turn over in their hands, inspecting its patterns and trying to understand its concealed mechanisms. In the original Hellraiser, Frank Cotton deliberately seeks out the box because he's exhausted ordinary experiences and believes that it can offer sensations beyond anything available in the human world. Once he solves it, the room changes and the Cenobites arrive. The box doesn't consistently produce music in every appearance, although Christopher Young's score and the film's sound design help make the process feel ritualistic. Its panels shift into new positions, and the completed configuration opens a doorway into the Cenobites' realm. Solving it doesn't necessarily unleash Cenobites across the entire planet. Usually, it establishes a connection between the solver and the Cenobites, allowing them to enter the immediate location and claim the person who opened it. However, later films and comics give different configurations much larger capabilities. In Hellraiser Bloodline, for example, Paul Merchant transforms an entire space station into the Elysium configuration, a structure designed to create perpetual light and permanently destroy the gateway associated with the Cenobites. The mythology also contains other puzzles and occult devices in expanded universe stories, meaning Le Marchand's box is not necessarily the only object capable of opening a path to hell. However, the Lament Configuration remains the most famous and consistently used artifact in the franchise. So what actually happens when the box is opened? Well, as we said earlier, nothing good. In the original continuity, the person who opens the box may be taken by the Cenobites and subjected to experiences in which pleasure and pain have become indistinguishable. Some victims are torn apart immediately while others are brought into the labyrinth. Certain people may eventually be transformed into Cenobites, but the films do not establish that every solver is automatically evaluated for recruitment. Frank Cotton, for example, is tortured and imprisoned rather than remade into a member of the Order. The 2022 reboot follows a different set of rules. There, the box's blade marks a sacrifice and the Cenobites hunt the marked person, regardless of whether that person solved the puzzle willingly. The Lament Configuration does not fulfill wishes in any compassionate sense. Whether it offers sensation, knowledge, love, resurrection, or power, its gifts are interpreted through the Cenobites' understanding of suffering. Who was Philip Le Marchand, and why are there 2 origin stories? You and I can both agree that every good story with an overpowered curse needs an amazing origin story. And thankfully for us, the Lament Configuration has more than one origin depending on what continuity you follow. One version comes from the Epic Comics established during the 1990s. In that continuity, Philip Le Marchand was not an innocent craftsman. He was portrayed as a murderer and toy maker who created numerous occult puzzles, sometimes using human remains in their construction. Expanded stories also connected him to supernatural beings and suggested that he created hundreds of configurations. The exact number, materials, and circumstances vary between reference sources and individual comic stories, so the claim that precisely 270 boxes were created should be treated as part of the expanded comic mythology rather than a universal fact across the franchise. This means that the familiar Lament configuration may only be one part of a much larger collection created by an extremely disturbed craftsman. When I first learned this origin, I genuinely felt like my childhood was ruined, and I sulked in bed for 2 whole hours wondering why I had researched this topic in the first place. And anyway, that was just the first origin. The second came from 1996's Hellraiser Bloodline, where Philippe Le Marchand was portrayed as a skilled but naive French toymaker hired in 1784 by a wealthy occultist named Duc de Lille. In this version, Le Marchand was unaware of the true purpose behind the box. De Lille used a completed puzzle, occult rituals, and the sacrifice of a young woman to summon Angelique, a demon who inhabited the woman's body. By the time Le Marchand realized what he had helped unleash, it was too late. He attempted to create a second design capable of opposing the first gateway, but he was killed before he could complete his work. Both versions agree on one central point. Le Marchand's creations connect the human world to supernatural forces, and his legacy continues to torment people long after his death. In Bloodline, that burden remains with his descendants until 2127, not 2217, when Dr. Paul Merchant completes the Elysium configuration aboard the Minos space station. He uses the station to trap and destroy Pinhead and permanently close the gateway. So, when it comes to choosing which story is true, the answer depends on the continuity. Bloodline provides the main film series' account, while the epic comics offer a separate and much darker interpretation. How does the box actually function? Here's where things become complicated because there's no single rule that applies to every version of the Lament configuration. In the Hellbound Heart and the original Hellraiser, the box responds to desire and curiosity. Frank Cotton deliberately solves it because he wants to access impossible sensations. However, the claim that nobody can ever be forced or tricked into opening it is not consistently supported. Christy Cotton solves the box without understanding what it is and still summons the Cenobites. While she explains that she opened it by mistake, they initially showed no interest in letting her go. She survives only by offering to lead them to Frank. In Hellbound Hellraiser 2, Tiffany solves the box while being manipulated by Dr. Chenard. Pinhead concludes that she's not the true person responsible, saying,
"It is not hands that call us, it is desire."
In that case, the Cenobites recognize that Chenard's obsession drove the opening. So, intention may matter, but the rules are flexible and depend on which film or story is being followed. Once the box is solved, the Cenobites may arrive. They don't consistently hold a formal trial to judge whether every solver is worthy. Their purpose in the original story is to provide experiences beyond the limits of ordinary sensation, regardless of whether the human recipient later regrets asking for them. In the Hellbound Heart, the Cenobites are associated with an entity called the Engineer, although Barker doesn't fully explain its position or nature. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 later introduced Leviathan and the Labyrinth, creating a different visual and hierarchical mythology. There are a few ways characters have escaped encounters with the Cenobites, but none is a reliable universal rule. Christy negotiates by offering Frank in exchange for her freedom. She also manipulates the box to close the doorway and send the Cenobites back. In later films, reversing or reconfiguring the box can close a gateway, but that doesn't guarantee that the person who opened it will always be released. Forming the box into its diamond-like configuration plays an important role in Hellbound Hellraiser 2, because Tiffany uses it while confronting Leviathan, but it's not presented as a general escape code anyone can use. Taking one's own life before the Cenobites arrive is also not an established rule for saving the soul. The franchise repeatedly shows that death does not necessarily protect someone from hell or the Cenobites. Frank Cotton's resurrection is another unusual case, not a general survival mechanism built into the box. After the Cenobites tear him apart, remains of his body remain beneath the floorboards. When Larry's blood spills on that location, Frank begins regenerating. The blood works because it falls on the place containing Frank's remains, and because supernatural forces have left him in an incomplete state. It does not prove that spilling blood on any object connected to an abduction can resurrect every victim. The most frightening thing about the Lament configuration is that the rules are never completely dependable. Characters often believe they've discovered a loophole, only to learn that the Cenobites interpret every agreement according to their own inhuman logic. What is the Order of the Gash, and how are Cenobites made? The name Order of the Gash goes back to Clive Barker's 1986 novella, The Hellbound Heart. where the Cenobites identify themselves as members of that order. However, the exact nature of the organization has expanded and changed across later stories. It's tempting to assume that every Cenobite was once a human who solved the box, but that's not been established consistently throughout the entire mythology. Several major Cenobites were once human. Pinhead was Captain Elliot Spencer in the original film continuity. Shenard was transformed after entering the labyrinth, and the 2022 film shows Roland Voigt undergoing a transformation into a Cenobite after choosing the Leviathan configuration. Other expanded stories also provide human origins for figures such as Chatterer, but Barker's original novella presents the Cenobites primarily as otherworldly beings. It doesn't state that every member was once a human puzzle solver. In their own words, the Cenobites describe themselves as explorers in the further regions of experience. The phrase captures their philosophy better than almost any outsider's description could. Pinhead also tells Christie,
Demons to some, angels to others.
According to the Cenobites, they're not ordinary monsters. They're devotees of experiences in which pleasure and pain have been pushed beyond human distinction. The films gradually gave Pinhead greater authority, but the specific title Hell Priest Order of the Gash, Pontifex of Leviathan, mainly comes from later expanded lore and should not be treated as a rank explicitly stated throughout the original films. The Cenobites' realm is commonly known as the Labyrinth. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 presents it as an enormous geometric maze ruled by Leviathan. Dr. Shenard compares the human mind to a labyrinth earlier in the film, creating a thematic parallel, but the movie does not literally confirm that the entire dimension is a physical human brain. Who is Leviathan, and why does it rule over the Cenobites? Although Pinhead has been nothing but a menace to society, he's not the highest power introduced in the original film series. He functions more like a priest or servant than a god. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 introduces Leviathan as the ruler of the labyrinth. Julia calls it the god of flesh, hunger, and desire, and identifies it as the power she serves. However, the film does not fully explain whether every Cenobite directly serves Leviathan in exactly the same way Julia and Shenard do. Later, comics, novels, and reference material expanded Leviathan into the principal deity and authority behind the Cenobites. Visually, Leviathan does not resemble a traditional horned demon. It appears as a massive rotating diamond or elongated rhombus suspended above the center of the labyrinth. It emits beams of black light that appear to expose memories and transform Shenard into a Cenobite. The visual similarity between Leviathan and the transformed puzzle box is deliberate, creating the impression that the configuration reflects the geometry and authority of the realm it opens. Some expanded lore portrays Leviathan as obsessed with order, law, and the removal of chaotic individuality. That idea contrasts with the uncontrolled desires of human beings, and it fits the rigid geometry of the labyrinth. However, the original films do not identify Leviathan as Lucifer, nor do they definitively state that it's a fallen angel. Its true origin remains unexplained. Connections to Lucifer belong to speculation or specific expanded continuities rather than a settled film canon. So for now, Leviathan is best understood as the godlike ruler of the labyrinth, not as a confirmed version of the biblical devil. How Pinhead was created. A case study in becoming a Cenobite. Now that we've discussed the Cenobites and Leviathan, it's only fair that we discuss Pinhead's origin. After all, he is the villain almost every fan recognizes, and his history provides one of the clearest examples of a human becoming a Cenobite. Before becoming the Hell Priest, Pinhead was a British Army officer named Captain Elliot Spencer, who served during the First World War. The horrors of the war destroyed his faith in humanity and left him disillusioned and emotionally hollow. Searching for new experiences and meaning, he eventually acquired and solved the Lament Configuration. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 reveals Spencer's human identity when Christie shows Pinhead a photograph of his former self. The image causes him and the other Cenobites to remember that they were once human. Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth expands the story, separating Spencer's human spirit from the purely demonic Pinhead personality. The films do not show the exact moment when Spencer originally solved the box or provide a complete on-screen account of his transformation, so some details come from later supplementary material. Spencer's memories were suppressed, but not completely erased. Christie's photograph and emotional appeal brought them back to the surface. Another interpretation comes from the Epic Comics, which connected Pinhead with Totec, an Aztec deity associated with flaying, renewal, and agricultural rebirth. That concept belongs to the comics and was never adopted as the main explanation in the live-action films. Either way, the stories show that becoming a Cenobite involves a profound rewriting of identity. A human body is transformed, memory can be buried, and the person becomes devoted to the philosophy of the Order. However, it is still inaccurate to say that the box is never meant to torture or kill. Many people who solve it are simply tortured, killed, or imprisoned. Recruitment is only one possible outcome. How the 2022 reboot reinvented the puzzle box. When director David Bruckner brought Hellraiser back in 2022, he didn't merely give the Lament configuration a new coat of paint. He completely rebuilt how it worked. The changes went deeper than most reboots dare to go. In this continuity, the box contains a concealed blade. After a new configuration is solved, the blade emerges and cuts a person, marking them as the next sacrifice. The marked person doesn't necessarily have to be the solver. Roland Voight and Trevor deliberately exploited this rule by having other people cut by the blade. Once marked, the victim is hunted by the Cenobites and taken by their chains. The box cycles through 6 shapes, each completed stage requiring another sacrifice, and after 5 people have been claimed, the final configuration allows the person controlling the box to request an audience and choose a reward from Leviathan. The system does not require 6 different solvers. It requires 5 marked sacrifices to unlock the final choice. The rewards are based on 6 concepts: life, knowledge, love, sensation, resurrection, and power. But every reward is interpreted through the Cenobites' philosophy, meaning the gift becomes another form of suffering. Voight originally selected the liminal configuration, asking for sensation. Leviathan responded by attaching a mechanical device to his body that repeatedly manipulated his nerves and kept him in constant agony. Later, after the 5th sacrifice is completed, Voight asks to exchange sensation for power. He receives the Leviathan configuration and is transformed into a Cenobite. The 2022 film also demonstrates that the blade can mark a Cenobite. Riley stabs Chatterer with it, and the priest accepts him as the designated sacrifice. Chains tear him apart and take him, proving that the rule applies even to members of the Cenobite Order. That does not necessarily mean that Chatterer is permanently erased from existence, but he is removed as the sacrifice required for that stage. The reboot therefore turns the box into a visible ritual with clearly defined stages, marked victims, and a rising body count. What do the 6 configurations actually symbolize? We've talked about the box a lot, but the 2022 version gives its different forms specific names and symbolic meanings. The 6 shapes aren't random. Each represents something a human being might desire. First is Lament, associated with life. At the end of the film, Riley refuses all of Leviathan's supernatural rewards. The priest tells her that she has chosen Lament, life without reward, including the guilt and regret she must continue carrying. Riley does not receive a magical gift. She simply chooses to live with the consequences of her actions, rather than accept the Cenobite bargain. The next configuration is Lore, associated with knowledge. Then comes Laudarant, associated with love. The 4th configuration is Liminal, associated with sensation. This is the choice that condemned Roland Voight to constant physical torment. The 5th configuration is Lazarus, associated with resurrection. Riley initially hopes she might use it to bring her brother Matt back, but she ultimately realizes that any restored version of him would come with a horrifying price. Finally, there is Leviathan, associated with power. Voight chooses this configuration at the climax. Rather than becoming a ruler free from suffering, he is taken to Leviathan's realm and transformed into a Cenobite. The box technically has 6 configurations in total, beginning with its familiar cube form and transforming through 5 additional designs. Concept artist Keith Thompson's published work confirms that the production designed the Lament configuration and 5 subsequent configurations for the film. The geometric forms also visually echo Leviathan's rotating body from Hellbound Hellraiser 2, creating one of the reboot's strongest links to the older film mythology. How have the Cenobite hierarchy and society changed across films? The Order of the Gash has never looked exactly the same twice. These films have continued for decades, and during that time the Cenobites have been redesigned, reinterpreted, and occasionally reinvented while the central concept remains intact. The 2022 reboot is one of the clearest examples. Jamie Clayton took on the role of the priest, a new interpretation of the figure traditionally called Pinhead. Her performance maintained the character's cold and deliberate authority while separating this version from Doug Bradley's Elliot Spencer. Because the reboot exists in a new continuity, Clayton's priest is not confirmed to be Spencer and should not be treated as the same individual merely recast. The reboot also introduced new Cenobites, each with a design built around exposed, folded, or rearranged flesh. Bruckner and his design team deliberately moved away from the film's original black leather. The new Cenobites appear to wear their own altered skin as ceremonial clothing. The production relied heavily on prosthetic costumes and practical makeup, supported by digital effects when necessary. Bruckner explained that the redesigned flesh served the function that leather had in Barker's original aesthetic, while still offering audiences something visually unfamiliar. The structural changes go deeper than the costumes. In the original film, desire and solving the box bring the Cenobites. Their agreements are flexible, and Christie survives through negotiation. In the 2022 reboot, the mechanism is more formal. The blade marks a sacrifice. Cenobites pursue that marked individual. 5 sacrifices unlock an audience with Leviathan, and the final configuration determines the reward. The new Cenobites still have an ideology that joins pleasure and pain, but their system resembles an organized ritual with explicit stages. Despite the differences, the central horror remains unchanged. Human desire opens the door, and the beings on the other side interpret every request according to values completely alien to our own. We know there are 2 connected concepts, and both serve one mythology. The Lament Configuration is the invitation or mechanism that opens the pathway. The Order of the Gash is the Cenobite organization encountered through that pathway. Leviathan binds much of the later mythology together as the ruler of the labyrinth, although its exact relationship with the Order changes depending on the film, comic, or reboot being discussed. One thing that's true across the franchise is that none of the people claimed by the box are genuine victims. Frank deliberately sought the Cenobites, but Christie opened the box without understanding it. Tiffany was manipulated into solving it. In the 2022 reboot, innocent people can be cut by the blade and marked without choosing the box or asking for any reward. Desire is central to Hellraiser, but so are manipulation, exploitation, obsession, and the danger of one person sacrificing another. The Lament Configuration evolved from a golden puzzle box to a 6-stage bladed ritual, but one thing remained constant: pain and transformation wait on the other side. If you enjoyed our video, please hit the like button, smash the subscribe button, and ring the bell icon so that you never miss another update from us. Until we meet again, make sure you don't solve any unusual looking boxes without knowing what they are, because it may be the last thing you ever do. Oh, and me excluded, but stay away from cottons, man. Lore Lockdown, signing out.